Hey, what's up? Welcome to your Hump Day edition of Locked On Raptors. On today's show, we are playing a game that we played earlier this season, and we're bringing it back by popular demand. We're playing a little game called What's More Likely. I have 6 either-or situations that are hypotheticals about the remainder of the Raptors season. We're going to dive into each of them. Are the Raptors going to have all NBA players or all defense players? Are they going to make it to the second round or lose in the play-in? We'll get into all that and more with today's guest, Vivek Jacob from Raptors.com. Stick around.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1124 of Locked On Raptors for Wednesday, February the 23rd. I'm your host, Sean Woodley of RaptorsHQ.com. You can find me on Twitter, as always, at WoodleySean. You can find the show at Locked On Raptors. And, of course, you can find the podcast free and available on all your favorite audio podcast platforms where you can follow, subscribe, rate, review, etc. You can also go to YouTube and check us out over there. Hit the big red subscribe button. 1.65 thousand subs so far. Let's continue to push towards 2,000, shall we? It would be very, very nice. Maybe I'll do some sort of stunt if we get to 2,000 by the end of March. I'll let Vivek decide what that stunt is. And a big thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day on today's show. Vivek is here. We're going to do some What's More Likely situations. We did this version of the podcast a couple months back, and it was a pretty fun little device to dig into some big picture Raptors questions. So we're going to dig into those. But first, we should say hello to Raptors.com's Vivek Jacob. It's Big V. It's not a Monday like typical because it's a weird holiday week. But how's it going, pal?
It's good. It's good. Kind of been in semi-vacay mode, getting a break from the NBA. I mean, I did consume the All-Star content, but other than that, it's been pretty relaxing and chilled out. So looking forward to getting back to it soon enough. Raptors back in action Friday. So it'll be fun to watch this closing stretch of 25 games or so.
Yeah, man, I am very excited to watch it because, and I think, a big part of it is the roundtable episode we did yesterday, which you can go and check out, where we did the chat with all the hosts in the 6 through 10 range in the Eastern Conference from the Lockdown Network. And it's just going to be a real sort of blood fight, I think, to the end of the season for positioning, not just for 6 through 10, but for 1 through 5. And the Raptors still have an outside shot at climbing up the standings, I would say, and, finishing somewhere higher than 6, considering how things are clustered. It's going to require them kind of getting off on the right foot. They played the Charlotte Hornets on Friday. They got the Hawks over the weekend, and they have 2 against the Nets. That stretch there is going to be rather large, I would say. But we can dig into the schedule that lies ahead later on in the week. We're going to dig into our What's More Likely scenarios now. And so, Vivek Jacob, we will begin with the first situation I have come up with. I sent you these before the show. They might be good, they might be not. They might be easy calls, they might be coin flips. We'll see how well I did in terms of coming up with good either-ors. But the first one here is the Raptors. Is it more likely that they will finish 4th or better in the East, or finish 9th or worst? Of course, they are currently 7th right now, just behind the Celtics, I believe a game back of 6th, and 2.5 games up on the Nets, who are down in 8th. What say you? Are they more likely to finish top 4 or 9th or worse?
Yeah, this is a fun one to start off. I got pretty detailed with this. I went and looked up the Raptors schedule and went through every single game. I checked out the remaining schedule strength on tankathon.com. The Raptors do have a pretty favorable schedule to finish, which leaves me saying that 4th or better is actually more likely than 9th or worse. In sort of a worst case conservative projection, I have the Raptors finishing with 45 wins. And in a best case, I can see them getting to 50. So I will say that 4th or better is likely. I don't think either is going to be the outcome. I think they probably finish 6th or 7th or 8th. But of those 2 scenarios, I will go with 4th or better.
That's the beauty of this show, baby, is we get to go with the extremes instead of hanging out in this soft, gooey, boring middle like we always tend to do. Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think it's more likely they finish top 4 than it is they finish 9th or worse. Just because I think it's more likely they win games and gain ground on the teams in front of them. That, the Cavs, I think, are still, I'm waiting for the bottom to fall out there because they're just not a very deep team. Their offense is not awesome. I don't know if I totally trust them to keep up this, winning pace after the All-Star break as other teams kind of buckle down. The Bucks have been like weirdly disappointing, and I'm not saying they're going to fall necessarily, but there's a world in which they continue to kind of be stagnant if their current win percentage, and maybe the Raptors kind of shoot past them a little bit. And we'll see with the Celtics. The Celtics I'm terrified of right now. They're really, really good. Their defense is more or less impenetrable. I think I still have some concerns about maybe the predictability of their offense, considering it's basically 30% usage guys and then a bunch of, first-year OG Anunobys hanging around. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. We'll see how sustainable that is. Maybe it is. Maybe it's playoff proof. I'm not sure. But, I still think there are avenues for the Raptors to climb past those teams in front of them, whereas I think the Hornets are kind of not very good. I think their defense is pretty shoddy, and I don't think, we were talking about this on the roundtable yesterday. I think they're clearly the team that's going to finish 10th right now. And then the Nets, I don't know if the Nets are going to have the time to catch the Raptors, and you need at least two of these teams to catch the Raptors for them to finish 9th or worse. And I don't see that happening with either the Hornets or the Nets. The Hornets, I just don't think are good, as I said. And the Nets, I think, just don't have enough. We don't know when they're going to get KD and Simmons back. And when they do, they're going to need some time to gel. There's going to be Kyrie missing games, etc. They have 2 games against the Raptors in the next week or so, and I think those should be pretty high priority games for the Raptors to go out and win against the depleted Nets team that Kyrie won't be playing in either of those games. And I think that's just going to put the Nets too far behind the 8 ball. So because the teams behind them do not inspire fear in me, I will say 4th is most likely, but I agree. I think probably 6th, 7th, 8th is the most likely finishing spot for your Toronto Raptors. Let's move on to the next either or. The next one I have here is the Toronto Raptors get a player selected to the All-NBA team, or they get an all-defense selection. Which do you think is more likely of those two, Big V?
So this is another fun one. I think when you look at the names that have kind of dropped out, I would say that the all-defense spot looks more open because, earlier in the year, you would have said Caruso's got to be in the mix, Lonzo Ball maybe, and then now with the games played, they're out. Does Chris Paul drop out of the mix now with pretty much missing the remainder of the regular season? So I think that makes it pretty clear cut to me that Fred VanVleet will make it. I think it's going to be really difficult to leave him off. I mean, sure, you go ahead and select, Marcus Smart, Derek White, Drew Holiday's kind of been a fixture on that team. So,
although the Bucks are not killing it on defense right now, so that's worth noting.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so, do people look at that and say, "Hey, we didn't give Brook Lopez as much credit as we should have"? So I think that's where I'd probably lean towards Fred VanVleet working his way in. I think what could get interesting is if they kind of overload it with forwards and bigs, because we know the voting is more flexible positionally for the All-NBA in comparison to All-Star. And so I was just looking back at the All-NBA the defensive team, the second team last year, and there was only one guard on there, and that was Matisse Thybulle. So
not a guard. You need to be able to dribble to be a guard, I think, but that's fine.
Yeah, exactly, right? So that goes to the point where I think the only thing that gets in the way of Fred making it is if they sort of say, hey, we got to include all these forwards and bigs, of which there are many, right? You look at Embiid, you look at Gobert, you look at Bam, Vanderbilt, I think, has a good case. Which of Evan Mobley or Jared Allen do you give more credit to? So I think from that standpoint is where Fred might get cut into, but I lean towards the all-defensive team more than the All-NBA, where you can see different names sort of bumping either Fred or Pascal out.
See, I think I'm more confident in there being. I think my actual take here is I think they're going to get both. I think Fred will make all defense, and I think Pascal is going to make all NBA at this rate. I think like the number of guys who have been hurt are going to cut into the number of dudes who make the all defense team. Oh, yeah, sorry, both teams, I guess. But like Draymond is going to be out for all defense and for all NBA, you would think, with the amount of time he's missed. KD is probably going to be out. Maybe not. Maybe 6 weeks isn't enough time, and maybe all NBA is a little bit less sort of stringent with the number of games. But I do think there's a world in which KD is not on an all NBA team because of the time missed, and maybe he misses more than the projected 6 weeks, which we hope doesn't happen because KD is awesome. But you never know. The Nets are kind of weird with injury stuff and don't really reveal their hand very much. I kind of think, obviously no Kawhi, Paul George is not going to be there. I think there's going to be a spot for forwards that Pascal can kind of easily slide into. He's been, just as we talked about, he's been one of the 15 best players alive this season. That's how good he's been and how all-encompassing his impact has been. And that's not even to say anything about his defense, because his defense is probably all defense worthy as well. Again, I think you make a good point that the front court and forward spots might be a little bit crowded. But guess what? Pascal Siakam's a point guard too, baby. Get him in as a guard. Get your second team all defense guards as Siakam and Fred in the backcourt. And I think we're laughing. But yeah, I think both stand a pretty good chance of happening. I would go all NBA with a slight edge just because I find that the all defense crowds up real quick. There's fewer teams. There's only 10 spots, only like 3 or 4 guard spots, as you mentioned. And I could totally see, the Celtics voodoo of Derek White and Marcus Smart taking up half those spots. And then you go from there. And, it's easy for Toronto Raptors to get left out of all defense discussions, I think is kind of the thing we've learned over the years. But we will continue on with a few more what's more likely situations coming up in just 1 second, including one about OG Anunoby and Gary Trent Jr. Who's going to score more between now and the end of the year? We'll get to that in 1 second. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. They are daily fantasy made easy, and you are going to love them. It's easy to use. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you against the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy, and Prize Picks is safe and also offers fast withdrawals as well. You can use their award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play. And Prize Picks offers a variety of options. You can go from points scored, rebounds, steals, and everything in between. And you can also do mixed sport entries. Maybe you are a fan of soccer and basketball, and you want to get Jonathan David and his over-under projections over playing for Lille along with Joel Embiid. That's totally possible with Prize Picks. It doesn't just offer the NBA. They have options on college basketball, college football, the NFL, MLB, soccer, MMA, and more. For a limited time, Prize Picks has an exclusive no-brainer offer for all Locked On listeners as well. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point, but you must use that code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. Sign up today. Use the code NBA for $50 free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. That seems like a no-brainer to me. It's not often players score 0 points. Go fire it up. Get that $50 free with Prize Picks. Daily fantasy made easy. Go check them out. And we continue on with your first listen of the day here on Locked On Raptors with Vivek Jacob from Raptors.com, playing What's More Likely. And my third What's More Likely scenario for you, Big V, is OG Anunoby or Gary Trent Jr. averages more points from now until the end of the year. As it stands right now, Gary Trent Jr. is a little bit ahead of OG in terms of overall scoring production, but it's kind of oscillated back and forth. Trent ride that super hot recent stretch. OG, of course, has struggled quite a bit lately, a bit out of character for him. So we'll throw out the first 50-something games. It's the final 20-something games we're looking at here. Who scores more on a per-game basis between Gary Trent Jr. and OG Anunoby? Vivek Jacob.
I'm going to go with Gary Trent Jr. I think that with the way the offense functions now, with Fred and Pascal as the primary options, Gary has sort of fit into that version of the offense better than OG. And I think that OG will have his moments, but I just think in terms of Gary's ceiling, like I could still envision him having multiple 30-point games to close out the season. I'd be very surprised if OG had a 30-point game the rest of the way. So from that perspective, yeah, I'll lean with Gary the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think that's probably the right one here because of that, capability for him to pop off and go for 40 whenever he kind of feels like it. I do think OG is probably going to have like the more sort of steady scoring production over the rest of the year. Like Gary could kind of oscillate, have his days where he doesn't shoot super well. He's a bit of a high variance guy when things aren't really clicking for him. And I still think OG, like there's just so many opportunities for him to find easy buckets within the Raptors setup. Like they look for him under the basket with those seal outs so that they kind of look for quick offense with. He's such a good cutter off of Siakam and off of Barnes and off of Fred, and I'm assuming off of Thad Young eventually as well. Like he is so good at finding those easy sort of opportunistic baskets that I think he's got kind of a baseline that's way higher than what it's been over the last week or so before the end of the like. But let's kind of dig into this for a sec. Are you concerned about OG at all? Like, or do you think it's more pre-deadline malaise and exhaustion from playing so many minutes and that this break will probably be good for him? Is there something you're seeing in the way that they were using him before the break that gives you some pause and some concern? Like, where are you at with OG?
I'm not concerned with OG. I think he, is sliding into the right slot for this team. And frankly, his role is probably best suited to, focusing on the defensive end and then chipping in where he can offensively. And like you said, taking those easy opportunities. We saw a bunch of those late clock scenarios where he's had the ball in his hands and tried to create off the bounce as opposed to maybe shooting on the catch. And I think now over this unofficial second half of the season, we're going to see a lot more of the latter, right? And so I think that suits his style more. So I'm not concerned about OG. I've maybe cooled off a little bit on what I envision his ceiling as. And then the only reason I say that is I think on some level to actualize that ceiling, he's almost not got to be fine with where he is in the offense right now.
Right.
Like Gary Trent Jr., when he's on the floor, it's almost like he's asking the team, why am I not the number one option? When OG's there, it's like he's cool. It's like, okay, if I'm the fourth option, if I'm the fifth option, that's fine. That's totally fine. And in terms of, getting to where his theoretical ceiling could be, I don't think, that's a mindset that caters to it. But I'm perfectly happy with him playing that role on this team.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. I think, if we were to see some sort of expansion of OG's overall kind of on-ball repertoire, it's probably coming at the expense of other guys on the roster, and it's probably coming at the expense of the overall sort of health of the team. There'll be times for him to sort of flex his muscles. I'm sure they will find some bench units where he can be like the 1A, 1B type guy and get some reps there. But yeah, I think it's pretty clear that the way this team is set up, it's borderline negligent to not have the ball in either Pascal or Fred's hands to start most of these possessions. And that's just going to ultimately leave OG as more of an off-ball guy. But I think he's just such a good off-ball guy that there's still such a high floor there in terms of what he's going to produce for you. And the fact that he is, I think really the greatest strength of this team is that, in those sort of big moments, it can kind of go to any one of five guys and you're pretty comfortable. And OG is kind of a reason for that, right? Like I feel pretty confident when it comes to him in crunch time on a catch and shoot three opportunity because Pascal has leveraged the defense to create such a shot. Like I feel good about OG being the finisher on those plays, which is a nice thing to have. And, if he were kind of being more of a sort of on-ball presence and more of a guy who things are flowing through as a hub, then I think you're probably taking a little bit less advantage of his strengths, which are his off-ball finishing abilities, I think. So with that, let's move into the next one here, the next what's more likely situation. This one here, I'm fascinated by this one because I've been waiting for the offense of this team to fall out of the damn floor all season long. It has not yet. So my question to you is, what's more likely, Vivek? The Raptors finish with a top 10 defense or a top 10 offense? Could be both if you want to go that way and take the soft middle. But as it stands right now, the Raptors are 10th in offensive rating at a 111.5 offensive rating. They're only 0.5 points per 100 possessions outside of 15th right now, which is the Spurs at 111.0. So pretty tenuous grasp there. The Raptors on defense are 13th right now, 109.8 defensive rating. They're 0.4 behind the Bucks for 12th. They are currently 0.8 out of 10th. So it's all very, very close here. And, at the end of the season, it could be similar sort of margins of difference. So it doesn't really matter all that much, probably. But what do you think is more likely, a top 10 finish on defense or offense for your Toronto Raptors?
I will say that I think the defense is more likely because I think they're just getting more cohesive as a unit and understanding the system better. And those growing pains that we saw early in the season, even towards the midway point of the season, because of the time missed for certain guys, we're seeing less and less of those. So I think that lends towards the defense being better. And then with the offense, I just don't think enough was addressed at the trade deadline to think that, they'll be fine the rest of the way. I think they're a bit of a known quantity at this point. And I think part of what they were able to accomplish in the first half of the season was that element of surprise too, right? And I think teams are going to be a lot more cognizant of protecting their defensive glass. Obviously, the turnover situation is something that the Raptors are just excellent at. It's tough to overcome that length and that switchability. So that's something that they can keep getting in their favor and getting buckets. But I wouldn't be surprised if the offensive rebounding kind of cooled off in this latter half of the season and therefore took out any hopes of a top 10 finish.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think the defense is more likely to finish up there because I do think it's kind of coming into form here. It's worth noting since January 1st, they're actually top 10 in both categories. They're number 9 in offense and number 10 in defense. So I guess it's possible if they're playing like the team they have been since they kind of got whole, maybe they are just going to be a top 10 in both. Again, very mushy middle answer here. But yeah, I think I kind of trust the defense to continue its progression more than I could trust the offense to continue kind of surviving at a clip that maybe is a bit unsustainable. That said, I think there's going to be a floor for the offense that's not going to fall down to 21st or anything like that because their transition frequency is still so high. They still are, slamming the offensive glass, even though it's kind of dropped off a little bit recently from their league high level in the first part of the year. Since January 1, there's still a 32.9% offensive rebounding rate. It's number 2 in the league behind Memphis, where they've basically been all season long. The gap is just a little bit bigger now. And maybe teams are starting to figure that out, but they still are just a team with so many guys who have such a knack for it. You do add in Thad Young, who might be the best offensive rebounder of the bunch all of a sudden, just joining the team. I think they're still going to make that a pretty big part of their identity. And I think the turnovers and transition will still exist. They're going to need, I think, if you think of January, for example, when they were really on a heater and Gary Trent Jr. was doing his thing and just kind of, shooting fire from his fingertips. That was like an unseasonably warm month of shooting from the team. I think they were second in the league in 3-point percentage over the course of the month. With OG really hot, obviously Pascal kind of coming back up and regressing to the mean, Fred doing his thing, Gary shooting 9,000%. If they can get another, sweet spot of shooting like that over the course of the season, that maybe kind of, gets them to the point where they're a top 10 offense. But that's a lot to bank on, especially when those looks are not necessarily the most beautifully created open looks because there's not a ton of spacing on the floor. It's just kind of difficult slog to get to the shots that they want. So I'll go with the defense as the more likely top 10 finisher as well, but I do think it's possible both happen. What's up?
I'm going to call a timeout. I've actually changed my stance here.
Because... Oh, baby. Drama. We love to see it. Scenes. Absolute scenes. What you got?
So I'm looking at the ratings on cleaning the glass. And okay. I'm trying to see the Raptors' path to being a top 10 defensive team. And so on cleaning the glass, they're 14th. They're tied with Minnesota. And they're behind OKC, and then Milwaukee and Philly. So I can definitely see them getting ahead of Minnesota and OKC, but then it's, hey, Milwaukee is 11th, Philly is 10th. How are you going to get ahead of those two teams? I do think Philly is actually going to be better defensively because I could see, James Harden sort of manipulating the half court, getting to the line more, creating more possessions where they're able to defend in the half court.
God, they're going to suck to watch, man. Oh, it's going to be a nightmare. Just a total nightmare. But carry on.
And so I think that will help them on the defensive front. Obviously, Harden also has his turnover issues, so that could be interesting. But then from the offensive standpoint, the Raptors are 11th on cleaning the glass and just 0.2 behind the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Right.
And so when I look at those two scenarios, it's like, hey, can the Raptors get ahead of Philly and Milwaukee defensively, or can the Raptors get ahead of just the Timberwolves offensively? I will say that the offense has a better shot at being a top 10.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think it could happen that they finish top 10 in both. I don't think that's crazy, like considering where they are. But yeah, that's a fair argument from your side. I still think I believe in the defensive talent more than I believe in the offensive talent, so I'll go with that. But certainly a well-made case on your side of the ledger. We will continue on with our final two What's More Likelies of today's episode in just 1 second. We're going to go big picture, look at the end of the season, even some free agency stuff. That's coming up in just 1 sec. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Bet Online. Football might be over, but basketball is in full steam, both in the pro and college ranks. From all the latest odds, totals, play performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, betonline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best place for sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, your favorite Olympic coverage, Paralympic coverage, and of course, coming up soon, hopefully, maybe we'll see baseball as well. I really, really don't want baseball to lose time because I want to put a lot of money on the Blue Jays to win the World Series because it's happening, baby. It's going to go down. Anyway, head to the website, use your mobile device, sign up today, and learn more about the trends in the action. Bet Online is where the game starts. And we will round out your first listen of the day with our final two What's More Likely scenarios of today's episode. Number 5 here. Let's get to it. Vivek, Raptors make the second round or they lose in the play-in tournament. The either or, again, probably going to be somewhere in the middle, probably going to lose in the first round if we're being honest with ourselves here. But what do you think is more likely? A play-in, bow out, and not making the playoffs proper, or an advancement to the second round?
So agreed. I think, first round exit is the most likely scenario, but I will go with losing in the play-in as more likely than getting to the second round. I just think that matchup wise, there's a scenario where right now they are playing the Brooklyn Nets. There could very well be a scenario where they are playing the Boston Celtics. There could be a scenario where they're playing the Atlanta Hawks, who I think have turned it around and are looking more and more like the team that we saw last season. So I could see them losing to those teams. No question about that. And so I would take that as the more likely scenario than them beating, one of Miami, Chicago, Philly, Milwaukee in the first round. If they get the Cavaliers, that gives them the best shot at advancing to the second round. But beyond that, I think it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, the matchups obviously are going to be huge. If they can get the Cavs in round 1, I think everyone's kind of hoping they get the Cavs in round 1. And hey, maybe that's stupid. Maybe you're asking to get Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley into oblivion. But I think that's probably the team you want to face. I also, maybe this is stupid, I kind of like the way they match up with the Bulls. And I think there's a world in which they could advance past them. I'm having a hard time envisioning them losing 2 play-in games, though. Like, I know it could happen. It's only 2 games and it's coin flips, and you can easily lose 2 coin flips in a row. But the Nets, in theory, won't have Kyrie if there is a Raptors-Nets play-in. That matters to me. Yes, KD is incredible, but without Kyrie as sort of an outlet, I feel like for a single game situation, maybe you just do the full-on, we send 2 to the ball and, kind of hope that we don't get destroyed. Maybe you do get destroyed by Seth Curry and Patty Mills knocking down open threes on the back end. But I just feel like without Kyrie, there's a path to beating the Nets. And I don't even know if the Nets are going to be in that 8 seed, honestly. And I like the way they match up with both the Hornets and the Hawks, as well as the Hawks have played here. I think the Raptors have kind of made them look their worst recently. And I think that matters. And I think they are a pretty interesting sort of size matchup to throw at Trae Young and whatnot. So, yeah, I think I feel a little better about them making the second round. I think Pascal is kind of playing like a playoff proof type player right now with the mid-range game he's got going. Obviously, we need to see if it holds up in the postseason. But I also think Fred VanVleet stands a chance of being a better postseason player now than he did maybe early in the season when it was so Fred dependent and he was on the ball so much. Off the ball is a whole different story, and he's a whole different animal to deal with for a defense. And I think that's more playoff sustainable as well. So I will say that there are enough teams in that top part of the East, I think the Bulls and the Cavs, who I think they can beat, that I would say the second round is more likely. But again, I think probably a noble first round loss to one of these really good teams is the most likely outcome here. But that's why we play the game, baby. We like to think about the extremes. Let's go to the final one, shall we? The last either or is a free agency related one. It is, what's more likely? The Raptors re-sign both Chris Boucher and Thad Young, or they let both of them walk at the end of the season. What say you for this one?
I would say it's more likely that they re-sign both. I think the Raptors, we know, aren't huge players in free agency, and so I think we could see them lean towards doing a bit more of their own in-house management. And then, if it comes down the line that there's an opportunity to upgrade on those assets, then maybe they'll look into it. But I think I would probably, between the two, bet on both of them being back.
I think I totally agree with you. I think there's maybe there's been this assumption that maybe they're just going to let Thad walk and it wasn't like a deal for the future because he's 33, 34. But like one of the first things Masai said in his press conference after the deadline is, we got his bird rights. I think they care about that. And I think that, the way that they've kind of already integrated Thad, the way Thad has kind of spoken about, and different pieces have been written about kind of the way he lines up with the Raptors sort of ideologically, I think it makes a lot of sense to keep Thad around for a couple years beyond this one. And I don't think it's going to take a crazy amount of money to keep Thad and Boucher either. I mean, we were talking about in the lead up to the deadline, guys like Eric Gordon, people who are going to make pretty significant money next season and why it would work under the tax. Eric Gordon makes like $19 million or so, and they would have been able to bring him in and also still have room for other additions with the exceptions and whatnot and still be under the luxury tax. Same logic, I think, applies here, where you could probably get both Boucher and Thad locked in for next season for the same amount you would pay an Eric Gordon, hypothetically. Yes, that leaves you with a whole bunch of dudes who are, same sized and same positioned and all of that. Again, I feel like that's a feature, not a bug to this Raptors front office. And there will have to be some moves to add shooting, you would assume, unless Delano Banton becomes some sort of marksman over the summer. Like, they're going to have to find ways to add shooting with their exceptions or whatever. But I do think Boucher and Thad, neither has played at a level where you're like, oh God, we got to pay this guy $15 million next year. This is going to be prohibitive. And so I think it's pretty reasonable to think they'll both be back. They seem to both fit what the Raptors want to do. Boucher has shown that he can play like winning basketball this season for the first time ever. I think it's entirely likely. It's probably their plan right now to bring those guys both back and have them be part of whatever the solution is going forward. I do wonder what that means for Kem Birch, but that's a problem for another day. Any lingering thoughts here on this Thad Boucher one, or shall we get the hell out of here, man?
No, I mean, I think the last thing I would agree with you is, in terms of the bird rights, it's one thing to get a rental on a championship run. The Raptors are not on that. And so I do think there is a bit more of a long-term outlook, or I guess a medium-term outlook with that.
Yeah, I agree for sure. He just seems like a Raptors kind of dude, man. I don't know. It seems like it's going to be a pretty nice fit. And I would imagine, once my theory that the best lineup for the Raptors is going to be the starters with Thad in place of Scotty, once that starts to bear fruit and they start winning their minutes by 10 points per 2 minutes, then I think they're going to be like, yeah, we got to bring this dude back. He's pretty essential to the things we want to accomplish here. With that, we will wrap up the show. Big V, you have been essential to the things I wanted to accomplish in this one. So I thank you for playing along with another round of What's More Likely. Do you have anything you would like to promote for the good people out there?
No. Thanks. This was a really fun chat, and you can, follow my work at Raptors.com, at CBC Sports, at Complex Canada, and you can follow me on Twitter at Vivek Jacob.
Everyone go do that stuff if you don't already. You probably should. If you're listening to this podcast and you don't follow Big V, I don't know what you're doing. But either way, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day every day. You can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Please go subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, etc. Also on YouTube, you can go and subscribe on there as well. And that'll do it. We'll be back again tomorrow. TBD on the topic. It's vacation week. I'm not doing a ton of planning ahead of time for this one. If I'm being totally honest, it's a week for relaxing and resting and coming up with ideas on short notice, baby. So we'll be back again tomorrow. We'll, of course, look ahead to the Hornets and Hawks games on Friday as well as the Raptors get back to action. But until then, thank you so much. Go make your second listen of the day Locked On NBA, as our hosts over there every single night are breaking down the action, and some big picture conversations going on over there this week with no games going on. But either way, go subscribe to Locked On NBA both on YouTube and on your favorite podcast apps. And with that, we will talk to you again on Thursday. Bye-bye.